Hello. Before we begin, we wish to recognize that the Museum of Art sits on unceded ancestral Tiwa land, specifically Oga now present-day Santa Fe. Even though Oga is no longer the thriving Pueblo community it once was, their descendants, the modern-day Tiwa people, still live here in Santa Fe and the local pueblos of Nambe, Kawake, San Ildefonso, Oke-Alkawagne, Santa Clara, and Tesuque. Remembering and honoring place is one of the fundamental aspects of the modern day Pueblo people. And we do this through ceremonial dance, song, arts, oral tradition, and blood memory. The places we honor include the living spirit of Oga, as well as those who came before and who remain present today. I'm Rebecca Aubin, I'm the head of education, and I am proud to present Mary Scully, head of curatorial and curator of contemporary art, who will introduce our artists who will be speaking today on the Art in Alcoves 2020. Mary?
Thank you, Rebecca. And I want to thank everybody who's joining us today. And I'm particularly appreciative to JC Gonzo and Marietta Patricia Lees, who are joining us today in a continuation of a series of virtual conversations that the Museum of Art has been producing that feature conversations with and between artists in our current exhibition. Today, the idea for today's program came when Marietta sent me a note expressing interest and appreciation of JC's work up in the current exhibition. JC's work will be up until June 27th in the current Alcove exhibition, and Marietta was featured in an earlier exhibition at the Museum of Art. We will begin today with JC telling us a little bit about his work, and then we will break into a conversation with Marietta. Both of these artists address the human connection to the environment in their own way, and I'm so thrilled they both agreed to participate. JC Gonzo is a writer, videographer, and photographer. His text, sound, and images all comment upon the environment and social themes. Gonzo's work begins with research and investigation. These excursions result in dispatches taking many forms, including the written word, performance, and installation. For his installations, The Land in Spirit and Until the Rio Grande Runs Dry, the artist utilizes instant photography, typewritten words, and found and collected objects. The results are referential, but as JC says, also a celebration of the chaos exhibited by the natural world. Thank you so much for coming, and let me introduce JC Gonzo.
Hello, I'm JC Gonzo, and my space in the current Alcoves exhibition includes two separate bodies of work. So on the left and center wall, which right now we're looking at the center wall, we have my series, The Land in Spirit, which features a variety of instant film photographs as well as text on paper. And then on the right wall, we have my series Until the Rio Grande Runs Dry, which are a series of instant photos arranged in a horizontal line, and you'll see that in a little bit. But so as Mary was saying, I investigate and research both environmental and cultural histories using photos, texts, and other mediums to present meta-ecologies or interrelations between landscapes and people that lie beyond the tangible impacts, like the use of fossil fuels or urban planning. Humanity and the environment are inextricably linked, but often we talk about and approach the environment as if we were a separate entity entirely, even today when we're discussing climate change. So, you know, my sort of belief around this is that we are the landscape and the landscape is us. And in my practice, I use familiar language like actual geographical reports and archaeological reports, botanical studies, things of that nature as a base to make it more personal and introspective and relatable. And you can advance the slides, Mary. This is an example of text that I was talking about, utilizing those things. I kind of implement a cut-up method, which was popularized by William S. Burroughs, who him and a lot of other countercultural icons are a big influence on my work. And you can continue. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so this is the left wall that I was talking about, Land and Spirit. And in the center on the shelf, you'll see a jar of red chili powder. And these are some close-ups. Okay, so this series is Until the Rio Grande Runs Dry, the horizontal line that we're looking at. And they're all done with Fuji Instax Mini with the black frame. And what I did was I traveled from the north of the state of New Mexico all the way down to the south of the state where my hometown is, Anthony, New Mexico, where you kind of have the meeting between the borders of New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico. And at that point, the Rio Grande is typically dry. So in all of these photos, I only photographed the water. I didn't photograph any context, no shorelines or foliage or bridges or, any type of thing, just the water. I was curious to see if the story of the water would show this kind of, I don't know if evolution is the right word, down to where the river runs dry, which is mostly due to damming and, of course, climate change. Here are some close-ups of the photos with the Polaroid or the Fuji Instax frames removed.
Do you want me to stop sharing and then break into conversation?
Can you go, so that everyone takes a look at Marietta's work as well. I saw that was the next slide. So we have a point of reference. And this is work that Marietta showed in the Alcoves exhibition, correct?
Yes.
Yeah. I really resonated with Marietta's work in the way that for so many reasons, which we'll talk about, but I love the kind of abstraction of nature and color. It really kind of makes you kind of refocus or rethink how you interact and look at it in a very kind of beautiful contemporary way. And yeah, that is what I have to share. We'll save the rest for the conversation.
Okay, great. And the slideshow ended too. So I thought, I hadn't ever made a connection between your work and Marietta's work until she sent me that note. And while it seems so different, I thought when we were coming up with this program, I thought, wow, it could be a really interesting match because you're both working with environmental issues, you're both combining media, and you're both sort of talking about the human trace or touch on the environment, that interaction, and whether it's a personal or ecological kind of response.
Yeah, and we have such kind of different approaches. And I think that we both are saying and exploring, while the things are very similar, they're also different, and I guess we do so in different ways. But I think the topic is so large that it really invites so many entry points for conversation and so many ways of expressing it too. Some ways that, might be considered very abstract and others that might be considered more traditional. And so that was really neat to see in Marietta's work. I wish I had the opportunity to see it in person when it was up in the Alcoves, but.
One thing that I talked to you about was this connection of people and the environment, but also often when people talk about the environment, they often reference a female body or a female form, and the juxtaposition of some of your images of men or males and the landscape kind of echoing one another, I think is so beautiful and poetic and just a little bit different.
Yeah, I think that it's pretty establish that the kind of traditional presentation of how humans in the landscape, it's pretty binary, you know, women traditionally with nature, and of course there's all that, you know, witchcraft and everything, and man with kind of industry and divinity and you know, kind of development or civilization. So I think that type of thinking obviously does a lot of detriment to how we think about ourselves as humans in relation to the landscape, but also gender, and how can we kind of reimagine these things in a way going forward, which we obviously need to do. I think that's very much an important part of the conversation. When we talk about environmentalism, is like also changing our own perceptions, some of which are so ingrained in us that we do it subconsciously without thinking, making these kinds of associations. So in a way, I kind of see that practice as almost corrective. And some of the criticisms I've received in a lot of my projects is when I connect the male body with the landscape, is like, I just, you know, I really think it should be women, or I think that these portraits should be like in a industrial zone. Like it's so embedded and it's so ingrained. And I think that, you know, now is a really great time to break out of that. And of course there's like the kind of nature man thing that we see, but again, it's also really tied to this legitimizing through like philosophy, which again, I think ties back to divinity and civilization. So I'm particularly doing it in a kind of sensual way. I wouldn't necessarily say erotic, but there is a sensual element to it, where my own kind of queer identity, of course, comes into play, but there's also like a vulnerability with sensuality. And so in that, yeah.
I'm sharing one of the compared slides now so people can see.
Okay, great. But yeah, you know, and this is sort of a development from one of the first sort of projects that I embarked on, that, you know, was a series where I photographed desert flowers in bloom throughout the Southwest, as well as young gay boys who grew up in the Southwest, to kind of make this parallel connection between the two, and which was really an exploration of myself as, you know, as someone who identifies that way and grew up in the Southwest. It was a way for me to reconnect with the landscape and the culture itself, with something that I initially felt like was something that ostracized me from the environment, both socially and just environmentally. So once I did that, I realized that the conversation was broader and was maybe beyond myself and my own identity, and it led to this. And so in the series that you'll see in, you know, in the exhibition on the left, I have these pieces framed in an order that helps kind of connect on a very aesthetic visual level. And then you get to the two enlarged pieces, which I felt like were, they're the big ones, but yeah, there we go. But anyway, the big ones that really to me are just like the most obvious or kind of literal expression of what I'm talking about. And which is why I made them the largest, you know, and when you're looking at things that are so tiny, you kind of need something large to draw you into the space. But yeah, that is kind of my background on the use of these models.
Well, it's a real, you know, you talked about kind of man conquering nature, and these are a very harmonious pairing. You know, they almost blend into one another. There's repetition between the body form and the landscape form, and it's a very different approach.
Exactly. And that's part of that whole like corrective thing, and the large conversation of like a very literal way of showing that, you know, humanity and the environment are one and the same.
Yeah, yeah. And how odd that it would need to be gendered anyway. Rarietta is rebooting. She had some computer problems, and I don't want to steal her thunder, but I wanted to kind of address one of the other things we talked about, and hopefully she'll be joined in before it's too late, about how New Mexico, and particularly being from New Mexico, born and raised in New Mexico, how that maybe influences your response to the environment. And also the work tends to be along the border of Texas and New Mexico, if I'm correct, I think.
Yeah, I've kind of expanded throughout the state, but that region is obviously very meaningful to me because that's where I grew up, born and raised. And so, yeah, this is something Marietta definitely wanted to talk about. She was interested in the backstory. So essentially, like I said, with the previous project that I work on with Desert Flowers, I felt really ostracized and alienated in this environment, which I did associate both like on a social level as like, a gay male, and which I really connected with the landscape itself. It's like everything's so oppressive. It's dry, it's harsh, it's brittle, it's incredibly hot, much hotter down in that region than it is up here, although it's gotten hotter up here since my living here. But anyway, so I always wanted to leave, instead of trying to connect or find my place or figure out what that is. I always was just like, I just need to leave. I want something completely different. And I think 6-7 years ago, like 2015, my friend and I, Red Cell, we sold everything we owned, and we worked together as like an art duo, doing like conceptual work. And so we sold everything. We're like, we're going to do this as nomads, and we're going to travel. And so, and it was definite. I was like at this breaking point, as was he. It was just like, we need to leave and have this change. And so I left and I got to travel, and I was particularly taken with Tangier, Morocco. I spent a lot of time there, and it just completely changed my outlook on life. And I had the pleasure of returning since, and forming a lot of friendships and connections there. But returning, which we ultimately had to do for a lot of different reasons, mainly financial. But returning, I was so almost depressed because I just didn't connect. I didn't have a sense of place. But one thing that I had kind of learned while traveling was so much is on perception and perspective and context about your kind of relationship to a place, and that those can radically change depending on what that is, depending on so many factors, right? So I was like, well, that's the one thing I have control over. How can I re-examine my place here in my home, my home state and everything that I felt so disconnected from. And so I decided to look at the landscape differently. And that's when I drew the connection between desert flowers, cactus flowers, desert wildflowers, with kind of the queer culture here, specifically gay males, as like I said, sort of a personal thing. And so that connection, first of all, the kind of rareness, the scarcity of the flowers, and the rareness and scarcity of queerness, at least at the time I was growing up. Thankfully, I've seen some progress in that direction in my hometown. But
well, yeah. And Anthony in that area is more how we would kind of think of as kind of an open West, I think, more than Santa Fe or Albuquerque, which is so urban. Yeah. So I'm sure even if their community was so spread out that even if there was community there as a teen, you might not have seen or met them.
Exactly. It was so sprawling, and there is a lot of isolation. And so, and when you're going out, when I was going out looking for these flowers that I photographed, not to talk too much about something that's not in the museum, but it led to this. It's that I would have to walk for miles in extreme heat, and I would find this beautiful blooming cactus in the middle of nowhere, and I would take a picture of it. And there's a certain time of day really that was best. And I was like, gosh, this is so similar to my personal experience. It really connected kind of like mind, body, spirit with how I felt. And that's when I kind of started to realize, well, our connection to the landscape is so much more than I ever perceived, you know? And so that's why I refer to these things that I do as these kind of research projects. It's an investigation into this topic, which I can do through text or through the image. I don't necessarily consider myself a photographer. I use photography, but all these things speak to each other. So, yeah.
Oh, I was just going to say, you talk about William Burroughs, and I think about dispatches, you know, and so that made me think quite a bit that using dispatch and using cut paste, that seems to be a big part of your project.
Definitely.
It doesn't even show me there.
Marietta is back.
Well, maybe. Let me see.
For sure.
You can hear me.
And see you.
Oh my goodness, what a technological eruption that was.
Thank you, IT.
But it sounds to me, because I was getting the audio, that you two have just carried on beautifully.
We tried, but you were missed.
Oh, well, I missed talking to you. So is there anything that I can contribute at this point?
We talked a little bit about the environment and JC's kind of connection to New Mexico growing up in Anthony. And then we were just talking about some of the other process, which is this notion of like cut paste or working with dispatch, which reminded me of some of the writings of William Burroughs, who I believe is an influence on JC, and who also spent a great deal of time in Tangiers.
Well, I think that JC will agree to that. I think he is a big influence. And I really appreciate your text plates, because in a way, you're adding to the narrative of your stories, but they're almost abstracted. You almost write in an abstract way, which I find really interesting.
Yeah, and I can speak more to that in relation to the Burroughs kind of cut up thing, which the cut up method really forces a kind of reconfiguring of your understanding of a material reality. And so with the text, they're a fusion of very dry, technical, geographical reports, my own diaries, which some of them are completely my own diaries. Some of them have like a sentence or even like part of a sentence from these geographical reports, or I'll switch a word because to kind of create that fusion that I'm talking about. And like I said, I like using these texts. A lot of them are really old. They're like 100 years old. In the 1912 archaeological report, you know, is one, I think they're interesting because they're so the opposite of poetic, right? But it's a really funny challenge for me to read through the whole thing and kind of reconfigure it. But also it's taking that language and that perspective and making it personal and making it introspective, making it something relatable. And I think that when you see the texts along with the images, which the images in themselves, you know, to me, it's a similar process. That's like I view and I cut and I select aspects of my physical reality into photographs, right? And I put them together and arrange them in different ways to kind of create this type of narrative. But yeah, you know, in talking about all of that, I just want to say counterculture is such an integral part of my work, or integrated part of my work and influence, because, you know, I even see counterculture itself as very much like it has its own ecology, it has its own evolutions, its own interdependencies, with a lot of varying factors that can help things grow and flourish under very specific conditions, or get obliterated and go extinct because of a shift in those things socially. So I see counterculture very much like I see the kind of natural environment. There's a lot of similarities.
How does that intersect for you?
Well, when I say like my work celebrates the chaos of the natural world, I feel like a lot of counterculture really taps into the idea or notion of chaos as subject, or even as like a mode of creation itself. And to me, that is a huge intersection. What is more natural, what is more human and real than chaos.
Well, that's interesting because you mentioned the word chaos, but when I look at your work, I find a peacefulness, because the imagery that you choose is these microcosms of nature and, the environment, and it's just very soothing to me.
Yeah, definitely. And that's part of, when I say chaos, it has kind of a connotation or an edge to it. And for me, chaos is just another way of saying maybe freedom. Or lack of certain expectations or restraints or elements of control that are implemented. So it's a liberation. It's a liberating kind of thing. And that's the way that I kind of look at it. And so that's why you see this serene thing. I also like, speaking of that type of like peaceful thing that you see when you experience my work, I find it really interesting. There's this kind of like battle when kind of artists who work with, and maybe it's not a battle, but there's this discord with artists who work with the environment. Some seem to think that quote unquote serene or pristine depictions of the environment do a disservice because it's not showing the conflict that exists because of climate change. And I don't, I don't believe in that. I don't really necessarily buy it. I see where they're coming from, but like I said, since we are the land and the land is us, I can take a photo of northern New Mexico and display it, and some of which are there. And there's too much juniper. The land was overgrazed, in the last couple centuries, and because it was overgrazed, you kind of have too much juniper. And you get the same can be said for, say, like, it was interesting. The fire department in Flagstaff, Arizona, had to really kind of educate the public because they were chopping down trees and doing some deforesting to avoid forest fires. And they were like, well, because of overgrazing, from people being here, you've lost a lot of the small brush that helps prevent the larger trees from catching fire during wildfire season. And when that was cleared out, more trees came together. When there's too many trees, all those trees are going to go. So, it's like you can look at something and think that it seems unaffected or pristine, but it is affected. We are all here, and we've all made an impact, and it has made an impact on us.
Absolutely. Well, what, Mary?
Oh, go ahead.
No, we're just putting our thoughts together.
That reference to the real world in your work is what's so interesting. And I noticed when you wrote the descriptions for your objects, it was vintage typewriting paper, New Mexico shelf, New Mexico pinon. So the place was really important. And I also feel like you're placing order to these objects, but there's also something so tactile about the work. Not that all work isn't tactile, but yours is quite tactile. the surfaces, the choice of objects, that seems to be very important to kind of relaying a feeling of maybe being in or of the land.
Definitely. And that was exactly part of my choice to incorporate those things, because there's this very sterile element, like me, like a lot of artists today, you know, we're kind of relegated to online, which means social media, to kind of share our work.
Right.
Like Instagram is my largest platform, right, to share my voice on a consistent basis, which has a lot of limitations, as cool and neat as it is to like have, you know, put your work up and it could theoretically be seen by anyone. It also is just this kind of screen surface, and you can't see everything interconnect with each other in the way that I can kind of take advantage of in a physical space. You can't get that tactile element. And so when I have the opportunity to showcase my work, you know, like what can I bring to the table that's different from our experience online, which so much of us, especially this last year, have kind of only been experiencing things on. So that was important, and yet was another level of like, how can I draw the viewer into this connection between humanity and landscape? So those elements were really important to me to make it a bit warmer, a little bit more inviting, which photography in itself can be, I mean, out of, even when in physical form, it's still like a 2D, very 2D, textureless experience.
Yes. Well, you know, when you were talking about the imagery, and I was saying it's peaceful, and you went on and talked about that a little bit, but it's really interesting to me because I believe in my own work that if I present work that is contemplative or is quiet or is minimal in a way, that people can be drawn into that and then contemplate it further. That beauty sort of attracts them. That brings them into the conversation rather than holds them back. And I found your imagery very beautiful, and that it was intimate in most cases drew me right into it and let me experience it. And I felt involved. I felt part of the conversation.
I think that for me, beauty is very important. Which a lot of maybe I hear the opposite in some conversations around but I think beauty is incredibly important, especially when talking about the kind of themes that we're discussing. Where do people, like average quote unquote people, where do they find their connection to the landscape? It's through beauty. You know, they go on a hike and they see a beautiful scene. There's something that impacts them. They go to the Grand Canyon, they're like, wow, and it has like this very beauty, and the awe has a very visceral impact that transcends their kind of plane of reality into something else, and has them consider their place in the world as well as the world around them. And I think that's such a great entry point into discussing these themes, and at least the way that I choose, and I see that in your work as well, which is so neat because we have such different approaches. But yet, like you printed these beautiful images of trees on silk, for example, which is a very tactile element that is so beautiful, and yet a kind of unconventional display that draws me in.
Good. But that makes me think about the fact that you use different mediums in your work. And I know that I also do that. There's sculpture, there's videos, photography. And I know that I do it because I'm trying to tell the story about something, and I think these mediums will best do that. Or sometimes if I'm telling a story, let's say about trees, like some of the work that was in Alcoves, I think that people can relate to different imagery. Like you said, the trees on silk. Some people will relate to that, others to the sculpture, others to more tactile things, perhaps. And I feel by bringing the group of work together helps more people to relate to it. But I'm interested in knowing why you use different mediums.
Well, I actually think that you touched on a lot of reasons why. I think that's one of the huge advantages of using all these different mediums. As I'm also interested in how these mediums maybe can sometimes speak with each other. And I think a big part of why I use it is because like that was my introduction to the art world. You know, when I was interested in art, it was more, I was interested initially in filmmaking, which itself, even though it's a 2D kind of time-based thing, you know, there's so many elements of art around it, or music, you know, kind of like the basis of entertainment. Like, yes, there's the album, but there's the album art, there's the live experience, there's all these other pieces that are part and that can change and shape the context. So, so my introduction to the fine art world or whatever, contemporary art world was through artists like Laurie Anderson, who I have tattooed on my arm because she was an influence on me at the time. And, you know, who of course, like she always famously says, call yourself a multimedia artist and you can do whatever you want. And, instead of falling into kind of a rigid place of like, I can only be this type of artist who does this type of thing.
Well, and I think part of that exploration of material is that you never get bored. You know, as an artist, you just keep exploring and using the different mediums. And I think that each person uses mediums differently. Like if I use photographs in an exhibit, it's not because I consider myself a photographer, but that it's my art to enter into that medium for a storytelling purpose.
Exactly. I relate to that so much. And yeah, if I were to look at your work, I mean, I see the photography is almost surprising because I first saw all these sculptural pieces and then all of a sudden there was photography introduced, but presented in a way that was almost sculptural in the sense of the hanging silk pieces, which is very elegant. Yeah, it is. It also kind of forces you as an artist to grow and play with different things, you know. And for me, I've been taking pictures for a long time since my dad gave me his 35 Canon AE-1 when I was a teenager. So I learned the analog way, and I kind of feel most aligned to that. And instant film had disappeared, and it came back in the last 10 years. And I loved it for its immediacy, its ethereal quality, unpredictability. Like when working multimedia, like using instant film itself is an experiment in and of itself because it's just like a very difficult thing to work with. And so that, you know, it also kind of went in when approaching what I call research from a multimedia angle. I wanted to do things that would be used in and maybe literal research, so like text on paper. A lot of the texts I read, a lot of the reports were actually just typewritten in old binders. There's some great antique dealers and book dealers around town that have such materials. And so kind of recreating those aesthetics and photos on the field, you know. So yeah, there's also something neat, I guess not to go off too much, but I just thought about it. I love instant film at this point. When I started, it was a pain in the butt to get because I had to order it from the Netherlands. And now, you know, since Polaroid has kind of bought it out and revived it, you can get it almost anywhere. And I love being on the road and being like, I'm out. I can just go into any place and get it. There's this thing, you know, I heard it from this artist. I'm not sure if it has a history beyond that, sort of anecdotally, but Kembra Fowler, a performance artist in New York City, talked about this thing called availabilism, of just using materials at hand. And this is a very different sort of aspect, but that was like, it made me think about accessibility in a different way with materials. And, you know, there's so much pressure in a lot of the kind of traditional photography world around the technology and tools that you use and the preciousness of it and the expense of it. And, you know, with my interest in counterculture and all of that, it's just, that to me is just, I have to reject it.
Right.
Yeah.
And, you know, a friend of mine, Betty Hahn, who's a wonderful photographer, and she once said to me, you know, when she teaches photography, she really encourages people, maybe this isn't the right thing to say, but she really encourages people not to focus on the technology, you know, not to learn too much about the chemistry, because then they will invent new things. And that always stuck with me. Because I thought, as I enter and try a new medium, not to learn too much about it, but see what I can do with it. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, totally. That is so cool. I really, I admire that approach. And I think that it takes a certain openness and degree of flexibility and curiosity that keeps your kind of creativity fresh and on edge. So I think that's brilliant. And yeah, I mean, I think most new things that we embark upon or discover as artists are often accidents, you know, which has happened with me quite a lot. I'm like, oh, wait, I didn't mean to do that, but now I'm thinking about this in this totally different way.
Right. Well, if you work with reporting back or making dispatches, you're obviously not starting with a preconceived idea. You know, you're kind of pulling together your files so that then you can do your report.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like an organic process. When I go out, I don't think like, this is what my project's going to be. It's more like, it's an evolution that's happened, and my kind of statements that I give about it are something that has evolved and has changed over the course of the years of me going out doing it. I go out and like, what does the land have to tell me? Where does my place on it? You know, like they have this photo in there. It's one of the photos in there, and it's a photo of my shadow in a juniper bush. And I remember walking and seeing that, and it, you know, I was like, this is my portrait in juniper, is sort of the way I thought. And it's kind of being out and being intuitive and almost spiritual in a way, and very introspective.
Well, you know, I always think that the human body, us, we're made up of all the same minerals and things of our planet. And so when you talk about being connected, you know, that's the way I approach it as well. It's like we're all one. We're all particles of the same thing.
Precisely. Can you actually talk about, one of the things I loved when reading one of your statements is your use of color. You talked about kind of experiencing color in the landscape and kind of recreating, or maybe that's not the right word, but implementing that experience in your work, which I love to see.
Yeah.
Like tree trunks with the neon green, you know. But anyway, can you talk about that?
Sure. And it's interesting because I was going to ask you about color, because the work in this particular exhibit's not color, but I suspect that maybe some new work is coming up that you mentioned to me that might have some color in it. But yes, color is actually the way I define place, you know, and my reference to place is a little different than yours, because I see, well, maybe not so different, but I see a description of place by traveling a lot and by describing in a visceral way the place where I have landed. And So color to me is really a way to bring up the feeling of the place, what you experience visually, the emotions, the memories. And what I find in doing that is that people do relate to the color. It does bring up emotion. It does give them sense of place. So if I'm in Finland in the Arctic Circle and looking at the colors around me, it's very rewarding to show that in Finland and have people immediately relate to it. Yes, that was the sky at 4 a.m. in the summer when it's 24 hours a day. That was what it looked like. That was the color. And it brings up a whole group of ideas and feelings. And, whether it's Snow White or glaciers or whatever, the colors really do speak to people.
Yeah, definitely. Colors can really be the entry point.
Yeah. They're an emotional thing. And, I was raised in New Jersey, which is called the Garden State. So greens are something that, I relate to. I live in New Mexico. Browns are things I relate to. Yeah. And we have those beautiful blue skies. So, it's color.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think black is a color too. That's disputable, I know, but it has so many intonations. And recently I did a group of work with India Ink, and oh my gosh, it's magic.
Oh, definitely. Especially like the context for the black too. The black can change everything.
Right. And some people are very fearful of black. And so I think that they maybe can become comfortable with black if we show them enough of black. So I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I agree. I mean, I only wear black, so.
Oh, well, look at Mary and I. We're kind of black and white. Yes. Well, there's an old thing I learned in grammar school, so you can imagine how many years that was. But there was a joke that we told that was funny in the third grade, and it was black and white and red all over. What is that? And of course, the answer is, I see Mary nodding. You remember that, Mary? Yeah.
I remember two answers. One's not suitable for Zoom.
Oh, that's the one I don't know. But, it's the newspaper. And I always thought that would be a great exhibit, black and white and red all over, because it has the double meaning. I'm throwing that out to you, Mary.
Okay. Making a mental note.
Okay.
So we're heading I think we've covered a lot, and everybody's a little shy in the Q&A department, even with some prompting. So I think we might want to just start to kind of tie things up. And I'm not going to end right now, but I want to say how you guys talk about your work and kind of the discovery that's part of your process was really fantastic today. And I just really appreciate your being so open and sharing with one another. And I feel like you guys are going to need to have a coffee or something soon. I hope we've made a permanent friendship. But if there's anything else you want to add or say about each other's work or ask, we should do that now. And then this will be recorded and put on our YouTube channel. So if anybody has missed it today, you can let them know too, then that way.
Well, one of the things I really liked hearing and reading in the text plates in JC's exhibit was the amount of research he does. And that always interests me, and I have to smile because some people, viewers, may look at art and not understand the background, how much research and thinking and ideas and planning and imagery in our minds. And I like to hear when that's discussed, because then people understand that we bring a body of information that we have learned from delving into the topics. So I think you really covered that, JC. Thank you.
Yeah, well, like I said, that this was sort of a journey in me finding my place in the landscape. It was also very important. It also made me realize how much I don't know about
Yes.
the landscape. I didn't realize how much I didn't know about where I grew up and where my family grew up. And so it's been hugely informative on that level too. And like, if I'm going to be talking about these things, I feel like I need to learn its history, beyond what I already know.
Mm-hmm. And, you did mention to me some new work that you're engaged in.
Oh, right.
And I think that might be a way to wind this up, because I think it's fascinating. And the work that I've done in the last year or so since the pandemic has been much more internal landscapes than I suspected. And tell me what you've been doing, because I think it's really fascinating.
I had wanted to do this for a while, and it was kind of eerie how perfect it, or I don't know if perfect's the right word, but I wanted to document and photograph the cemeteries of New Mexico. Growing up and seeing the places where my family members were being buried are very, maybe people would call rustic, wooden crosses, hand painted, mixed with some stone, or some made out of dried cholla cactus, and of course, very decorated with flowers, very floral, very colorful. And when you're a kid growing up, and that's a part of that reality, and that's all you see, and then you watch TV or whatever, the cemeteries are the kind of more East Coast depiction, the marble, the stone,
Right.
in a very manicured lawn. And I was always kind of confused as to why it was different. And that you can, much like how you can see people in the landscape and landscape in the people, you can, cemeteries are really a depiction of the living as much as they are a place for the dead. The culture is there. There's subtle regional shifts and trends in the decor that I found interesting. Again, I'm like, well, what is there to discover? I go out, I find them, I document them or examine them and see, like, okay, in this region, astroturf is a very popular decor choice. In this region, what do they call tumulus? The mounds, kind of above ground, are very popular, but not over here where they use more dried cholla cat. There's so much variation, and it's interesting to see these things as well. And then of course, again, with research, reading old death records, and all of this, doing it during the pandemic. I started right when the pandemic kind of started, and because I had some more flexibility to take the time to do this and do something that was very isolated. And yeah, also felt right. And, as a way to kind of meditate and think about how we culturally relate to life and death, how we process it, and what that means today in the midst of a global pandemic. So.
Right, after we've lost so many people.
Yeah.
So, well, we had one question and a compliment on the wonderful intergenerational conversation and how your intersections were really palpable. But one question was how to see more of JC's work. And I thought maybe both of you could share your websites.
Yes. I'm just looking, is there a place to put that in chat, or should we
put it
just?
in the chat, but I think if I remember correctly, they're both fairly simple.
Like mleese@marietalease.com.
Wait, that's your email, not your website.
Oh, you're right. www.marietalease.com. Thank you, Mary.
No problem, but you might get a lot of email today. What about you, JC? And I will type that. I will try and type that in here.
Okay, I think I just typed it out. It's just
Okay, perfect.
It's just jcgonzo.com, and I'm on a handful of social media platforms as JC Gonzo. And you can find me there, where I do kind of share what I'm working on at the very moment.
Good.
And I saw that Red Cell, your co-conspirator in the product division, was here. So
Hi, Ren.
that's great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your conversation and sharing your time with us and sharing your work. It was really greatly appreciated. And we're getting a lot of, that was wonderful, this is wonderful, and very interesting. So we knew it would be. So thank you so much.
Okay, I'm sorry for the little chaotic technical problems.
Oh,
but
no
thanks-
problem.
Thanks for the invitation, and thank you, Gonzo. This has really been great. Thank you, JC.
Thank you so much, Marietta, for the fascinating conversation. I am excited that I got to talk to you because I feel like you really got it and asked all the questions I've always been, like this is, yeah. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you, Mary.
I did nothing.
Oh, everything. Your curation brought us together.
Well, have a really good rest of your day. And I'll see you out on the land.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.